Good afternoon now, everyone. I guess we are afternoon officially. We have been proving all morning that we're the International League of Conservation Photographers, and you've been taken all over the world by my fellow presenters, so it's probably time we drop into our own backyard. And I think the thing that's so remarkable about this for me is that we've seen incredibly wild places. Certainly the extraordinary diversity of Ecuador and the jungles of Borneo. And I'm going to take you to a place in North America that is easily as wild as those, maybe not quite as biodiverse because it's so far north, but easily as wild as those, and most of us have no idea these places are even there. It starts off in a place called Bristol Bay, and the story that you would read in the press is that we are trying to prevent a mine that might impact a big fishery. So, sorry about that, but let me go back. There we go. The big, I think my batteries died on my, is it? There we go. Thank you for that. The Bristol Bay area right here and the Bering Sea are some of the largest and most unpolluted fisheries still left in North America. And the largest salmon fishery in the world, in the history of the world, is right here. And it's fed by this river, which is called the Togiak, and this one, which is called the Togiak. Now, half of the water coming into the fishery comes from this area right here. This is Lake Clark National Park and Reserve, 6 million plus acres. This is Lake Iliamna, one of the great freshwater lakes in the world. And this is Katmai National Park and Preserve, some 6 million acres also. And their watershed all comes down the Togiak and goes into Bristol Bay here. On this side, we have Wood-Tikchik State Park, an Alaskan state park that's 1.6 million acres. And then we have Togiak National Wildlife Refuge, which until about 4 years wasn't even on the Department of Interior's mapping, even though it has been designated since 1972. So these are areas that aren't even well known to us as Americans. And this whole region is referred to as Southwest Alaska, and it is the drainage that feeds the whole Bristol Bay habitat. So this is what it looks like at the mouth of the Togiak River, and you're looking out into the fishery of Bristol Bay. Many of you may know this fishery if you watch reality TV, because this is the most dangerous catch show film grounds. It's between the Bristol Bay fishery and the Bering Sea that all that activity takes place. And for the most part, you well know that this is an incredibly stormy place. It pumps massive amounts of weather out of the Gulf and the Bering Sea, and it dumps them into Alaska across a vast terrain that is actually walled off from interior Alaska by the tallest mountain range in North America, the Alaska Range, crowned out by Denali. Most of the peaks in the range are 16,000, 17,000 feet, and all that weather coming in off the Bering Sea slams into them, comes down into the landscape as snow or water, and it creates this astounding environment of hundreds and hundreds of rivers and literally tens of thousands of lakes. The rivers are of every description, big broad valleys like you just saw there in the Togiak. This is the Iliamna. It's a designated wild and scenic river coming out of Katmai Park. This is a tiny stream called Tulare Creek, and people travel in from all over the world just to catch trophy trout in this stream. And if you look at this stream, it looks like it's flowing through a tundra desert because the tundra around it is so dry. It's mostly mesas and lake basins, and this tiny little beautiful valley runs down through it. It's so small, it's hard to imagine. It's one of the most popular trophy fishing streams in the world. In the backcountry of some of these parks, it's like a world you've never seen. I fly in a small plane to make many of these pictures, and I would regularly come over a range and drop down into a valley, and both the pilot and I would just be completely speechless because things like this would unfold in front of us. The streams are of every description. There's beautiful little quiet ones. There's white water everywhere. There's this spectacular clarity of water that's everywhere. And there's big white water as well. This is the upper reaches of the Togiak around one of the larger falls coming out of Wood-Tikchik Park. This, however, is my favorite. When I asked the pilot where we were, because I don't think I've ever seen a body of water with that much white water on it, He said, well, the Indians have a name for this, but I don't really know what it's called. And I'm like, well, why, how could that be? You're flying here. And he goes, well, I know, I just follow the river. I don't necessarily know its name. And I'm like, you know, how much whitewater do you think is there? And he said, well, I don't think anybody's ever run this in a kayak yet. So there you go. The other side of it is the quietude of some of these streams. This is another nameless stream wandering across the tundra of generic Southwest Alaska. It's not in a park. It's not really any place. It's just out there flowing to Bristol Bay. And then there are the other side of that, these really massive rivers. This is the Togiak, very close to one of its most productive areas, which is called the channel, and the channels. And if you look real carefully up here, this is a really big river coming in, and it looks like it's a stream flowing into the Togiak. This is Lake Iliamna. Yeah, I mentioned it's one of the great freshwater bodies in the world, and it also has a unique species of freshwater seal, which I'm ever so grateful. As we began to assemble the coalition that we put together to defend Bristol Bay, and in my case, all of Southwest Alaska and the parks, one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to bring in old partners of mine on the West Coast, the Natural Resources Defense Council's West Coast office, which is headed by a brilliant lawyer named Joel Reynolds, and many of you may have read the Whale Wars book, which is about how an attorney for NRDC defeated the Navy in court over sonar testing in whale territories. That's Joel Reynolds they're writing the book about. And Joel has been my friend for over 30 years, and we have developed some amazing campaigns together, and I wanted him in the Bristol Bay campaign, and he said, you know, we're 6 million strong, and I know why you want us in the game because there are so many players, but he said, we can't come in and step on the toes of all the Alaskans and all the other groups that are already in the coalition. And when they found the freshwater seal, they found their niche. So it let them in the door, and they brought with them their 6 million membership, which is really important. Now I'm going to take you on a tour of these parks. This is Katmai. Many of you as photographers have been here because this is one of the greatest bear viewing areas in the world. And we've all seen that photograph of the grizzly at the top of the falls, and it looks like the salmon's jumping right into his mouth. I think Tom Mengelson made, no, I think Art Wolf made, no, I think, no, never mind. They've all made it, okay? And Brooks Camp, which is where that all occurs, is right over in here. National Park Service access area. And right outside the door of your cabin, here's, you know, a mother and her cub having dinner, a little appetizer in the evening. The back country of Katmai, however, is a spectacular place. One of the great recreational fishing destinations on the planet. Beautiful lodges in remote places. You can only connect to them by air service and boat. They often pick you up at the one tiny little city that's out here called King Salmon, population 5,000, and then you're flown out to these lodges for 5- and 7-day junkets of fishing. And every day you go out and you fish a different space because you get taken out in planes and they put you down on the ground and you're there all day. And so you experience this vast backcountry and a really different location every day. It's a fantastic experience. And then there's Lake Clark Park. It isn't just Lake Clark. It's lots and lots of lakes. This is twin lakes. There's Talaquina, there's Turquoise. Many of them are big. Many, many more are very small. From them are generated some of the most important rivers in the Nushagak system. Indian names for these rivers like Mulchatna and Nustuyahak. But the point is, they're all part of the drainage, they're all part of the fishery, and they're all feeding into this fantastic system. So the idea that you might put a mine in the headwater where all of it would drain down into this bay is beyond stupid. This is the headwater of the Mulchatna right here to give you some sense of it. And if you're noticing that this unusual mountain slope looks a little volcanic, it's because not only is this one of the largest ranges in North America that all of these parks are up against and Southwest is up against, but they're also some of the most volcanically active areas in North America, and the McKinley Lake Clark fault intersection is the single largest seismic area in North America, and it gave off one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded in North America. So this is an incredibly dynamic area that is, you know, not necessarily stable. It's been built up on top of volcanic debris, and underneath this tundra and all this vegetation, there's such porosity in the rocks that the water is actually exchanged between river systems sometimes, depending on the flow in the basins. As you leave Wood-Tikchik Park and you come up over the top and into Togiak Refuge, you get into the Wood Mountain Wilderness area. Hunter and fishermen have been in here, Alaskans and native First Nation have hunted in here for a long time, but for the most part, we would consider this untouched wilderness. There's no trails, there's no camps, there's no access if you don't have a float plane and a good pilot, and you want to come out here and be on your own for 4 or 5 days, you'd best be armed and know what you're doing. Spectacular. Easy to get lost, easy to get killed. Lots of predatory animals out here. As Edward Abbey said, you really haven't gone backpacking if you didn't enter the food chain. So this is where you get to do that. As it becomes highly alpine, it looks similar to alpine environments we know in North America, but remember we're above the Arctic Circle at this point, and so we're in a very different kind of climate range. And when you come down on the other side into the Togiak Refuge, this opens up in front of you and flows off to one of the largest sections of coastline of any designated park of all the parks in North America, not just Alaska. Togiak has a fantastic coastline. It also has 4 major rivers, this one being the Togiak itself, but there's the Good News and the Connectoc and the Chiliclikna. They're Yupik words. I have trouble with some of them, as often as I've tried to say them. And then this coastline that I was mentioning to you with these astounding tidal estuaries. I should mention that the tidal flux in Alaska, in this part of Alaska, on a small day is 18 feet plus or minus twice a day, and on big, it's 24 feet. So this is a huge flux, and it opens up miles and miles when the tide goes out, and then it just inundates them when the tide comes back in. But living in California, I'm a fan of the Big Sur coastline and the drama of where mountains meet the sea, and this place has it all. Togiak is one of our least known, most spectacular destinations in North America. And just up the coast right here, and I never got a great shot of it because I was losing my light, there were 3 grizzly bears feeding on the carcass of a dead whale on the beach. So that's pretty odd stuff as far as I'm concerned. The first mission was in 1998 when I went out there. I was brought out there after 9 years of service on the board of the Alaska Conservation Foundation, and a retiring director said, "Do you have any new projects you're working on in Alaska?" And I said, "No, I wish I did. Anything to keep me up here." And he said, "Well, my friend and I fish a lot, and he's a writer for a number of fishing magazines. We're going to go out and fish Southwest Alaska. You want to come along and see this? Nobody even knows it's there." Well, when I got out there, I thought it was pretty fantastic. I understood the potential threats to the area, and I realized the first thing we had to do was to create a presence for Southwest Alaska in the public mindset. So the first book came out in 2001, there was no mine that had been announced yet. Our primary concern was the quintessential struggle in all fisheries management, which is don't lower the quota and always make sure enough fish are returned to the rivers to keep the population balanced and high. Don't overfish it. And so that was really the point of the essay in this book. We weren't talking about the mine because the mine didn't exist. Now, what I realized when I finished the book was no one had ever done anything about Wood-Tikchik Park. It was a park that even Alaskans didn't know existed, and it was also 1/3 of the watershed of Bristol Bay. So I had more pictures of the park than I could use, and I went to the Parks and Conservation Organization in Alaska, the State Department of it, and said, would you like to help me get this book published just on Wood-Tikchik? And the director knew me, and he said, I'd rather do like you do. I'd rather turn it into a political book than a book just aggrandizing the park. And we have some real issues about inholdings, private inholdings inside both the national parks and inside the state park that could easily be developed if the inholders sold their land off to development-minded people. So we wrote that book about what damage inholding could do to the park areas, not just Wood-Tikchik, but all of them in Southwest Alaska. This is specifically Tikchik, and as you can see, and I've suggested to you, this is really a remarkable park with a remarkable diversity of terrain in its 1.6 million acres. There are 22 huge glacial lakes and dozens of rivers that connect them all, and then they all feed into 4 or 5 principal rivers that are the drainage of Bristol Bay. The lakes were carved out in a glacial period thousands of years ago. Some of them are over 900 feet deep. One of them they don't even get sonar bounce back from. And the First Nation villages in the area say there's a creature that lives in the lake that sounds very much like the Loch Ness Monster. So, and in the winter, of course, all the there's 26 First Nation villages out here in this area. Most of them don't have more than 400 or 500 residents. And winter is really when they're out. The summer is when the white men come in to fish and all the trophy people and all the park visitors. And then in the winter, it's 50 below most of the time. And as my friends tell me, you white guys really just don't know how to dress right. And they go out and party and fish and hunt and do all of their normal activities in the dead of winter. This is just really one of the most single spectacular locations that I have ever been in. I would go back to Wood-Tikchik and camp travel or whatever in Tikchik above just about any other place I've ever visited. In 2004, we produced this book, and while the book was on press, a Canadian company named Northern Dynasty announced the proposal to build the Pebble Mine, which the pro-development Alaskan state legislature gave them permits for immediately and said, please be our guest. So what I want to make a point of is how aqueous this environment is. We're talking 22 to 25 feet of snow spread across all these parks and this vast area that's only slightly smaller than the state of Washington. And as it starts to melt off in the summer, the water doesn't let up because now you're taking summer storms coming in out of the Bering Sea. It rains almost every day. I don't think this is rainfall equivalent of, say, the Tongass rainforest, but this is a very, very wet environment. And it's given up, as I said earlier, to tremendous amount of volcanic activity and seismic activity. This is the Valley of 10,000 Smokes in Katmai National Park. And most of us have never even heard of the Nova Rupta volcano, which was the largest single volcanic eruption in human history. So, recorded human history. So this valley of 10,000 Smokes was buried under 100 feet of ash during that eruption and is an example of the volatility of this entire area. Again, I mentioned earlier how porous it all is beneath the tundra cover. So here's an example of where the tundra hasn't quite taken over yet. The lichen are sort of in charge here. The reindeer love this, but eventually it becomes this, and a much more lush, biodiverse world, but one that really doesn't want to stick its head up more than about 3 or 4 inches from the surface, because once it gets above the snow layer, it will be frozen solid in the middle of the winter, and it will kill the trees and the plants. So the plants are all happy to have that snow cover, and at the same time, they act like some sort of fantastic sponge. You never have floodwaters in these rivers in that sense that we have flash floods when it rains in Southern California and Arizona and Texas and places like that, because this incredible aqueous system has been designed to absorb all that water in proportion. What you do have is this incredibly wet bottom ground, so wet indeed the trees grow up on tree islands because their roots would rot otherwise. And the tree islands, as you can see, are a very defined place, and everything else in between is so saturated that every morning and every evening in the summer season there are what are called diurnal fogs. And actually your taking off to go fishing from your lodge and your getting back in are all based on the expectation of these fogs making flight visible or not visible. But the bottom line is, and you can truly see it here, it looks like it's solid ground, but it's barely solid ground at all. Walking across the open tundra in the summer would basically, in most places, be like trying to push yourself through the Everglades. The water may not be that deep, or it may be. If you step down into one of these black water holes, you may find it's completely overhead. It could be so deep. But it, generally speaking, just really difficult terrain for overland travel and incredibly aqueous with all the water right at the surface. So this is the site of the proposed Pebble Mine. The mine, and no offense to the incredible biostatistics coming out of Ecuador this morning, I am now going to strobe you with industrial superlatives. This will be the largest open pit mine in the world. It will be 2,000 feet deep and 2 miles across. There will be nothing left in this picture, so to speak, except a hole in the ground. The mine will produce 3,000 tons of crushed rock for every man, woman, and child on this planet alive right now today. And all of that rock will be cyanide leached to draw the gold out, because this isn't nugget gold, this is particulate gold, which now means all of those rocks are contaminated with cyanide in perpetuity. The mining company suggested they would, rather than build a tailings dam, just dump all of that in Lake Iliamna, but that didn't really sit well with the native populations or too many of the conservation groups. So they have since proposed 20 hectares of tailings ponds, which, I mean, really think about this. First of all, it's going to take dams larger than the Three Rivers Gorges to hold these tailing ponds back. Larger than Three Rivers Gorges in China, okay? You're going to do this in earthen dams. They're not even going to be reinforced. They're earthen dams in one of the most seismic actively areas in the world. This is not really a bright plan. You hired the contractors to build the dams that built the dams for Mount Paley in Canada, which just blew out and flooded the Fraser River with, toxic slurry. In this case, it won't just be toxic slurry, it'll be cyanide toxic slurry. So this is just completely stupid, and unfortunately, let's retrace. Here's Katmai, here's Lake Clark, here's Lake Iliamna, Wood-Tikchik just coming up over here, the Togiak River and the Togiak River, and this is the black area, the actual mine, and this is other areas the state would allow them to mine if they wanted to, based on the permit. Immediately adjacent, and in some cases, touching the borders of Lake Clark National Park. I'm sorry. If you've never seen an open pit mine, what happens is they all go so deep that they begin to tap into groundwater in springs, and they begin to fill. So this is the Butte, Berkeley pit in Butte, Montana. And the Berkeley pit's been there a long time. It's the largest open pit mine in North America. But it's breached so many various streams and aquifers, it's now filling faster than they can pump it, and it threatens the entire watershed of the Clark Fork. But more importantly, the water coming up is interacting with the iron ores in the walls that have been mined, and it's creating a water pool right here that's so toxic they're now mining the water. In the case of the Pebble mine, they can't mine the water because it's cyanide slurry and totally poisonous. So they're just going to store it in open ponds in the middle of wilderness that cover 20 hectares. And exactly who will build the fences around these so that the wolves and the caribou and the moose don't think they're lakes to drink out of? And who tells all the migratory birds on the Pacific Flyway that they shouldn't land on these ponds? I mean, this is just ridiculous development ideas of the worst kind. And I was so excited when NRDC came in 2006 to get them into the program, but they didn't really turn on the power of their machinery until about 2010, when it didn't look like the mining group was going away, and in fact, it was building up a consortium of investors that included the biggest investors in the world, Anglo American and Rio Tinto and Mitsubishi, who had all come on board to fund this mine. Now, I'm happy to say that Mitsubishi met Joel Reynolds and I some years earlier in San Ignacio Lagoon in Florida, a whale birthing lagoon that they wanted to put a salt plant in. And we ran full-page ads in the New York Times and the Washington Post, the first time saying Mitsubishi don't do this. The second time we listed every product name under Mitsubishi's label, Samsung, Toyo, et cetera, et cetera. And we said, don't buy these things. 3 weeks later, they pulled out. And there was no salt development, industrial salt development in San Ignacio Lagoon. So Joel came to me in 2010 and he said, let's start that tact again because we're not getting anywhere with these miners. They're going to do their thing. And the first thing he set up was what we call tag team lecturing. So here you can see Bobby Kennedy Jr. introduces me. I do my speech. And then Bobby Andrews is one of the principal speakers for the First Nation villages up there. So we would do our little 3-person thing in these slideshows, and we did them all over the West Coast, and I did some in Alaska. We came to New York and did some. And then this is actually Bobby Andrews right here, and a number of my coalition friends from Southwest Alaska. And this is Secretary Salazar, who's about to leave office, and the Pew Charitable Trust and the villages are giving him one of my prints from the Togiak Bay watershed as a retirement gift. And I guess his return to me was he gave me the Partnerships and Conservation Award from the Department of Interior. Now, we get to Earth Day in 2010, and we have this statistic we revealed about the 3,000 pounds of waste for every living human on the planet. So we decided that was going to be the first ad. And this ran in Washington Post, New York Times, and the London Financial News, which is where the parent investment corporation is. And it basically just cites the statistics. And a year went by, and it got around to Earth Day again. And Joel Reynolds had asked me if there was anything else I thought we could do to the campaign. And Robert Redford and I had been friends for a long time. And I said, I think he's the greatest spokesperson for the environment in all of Hollywood. You heard earlier today, sticking Sting's name onto the cover of a book helps it sell. And there's no doubt that Redford's presence makes people pay attention. So we brought him in. And the beauty is that Redford has one of the great open pit mines in Utah, not very far from Sundance. It's called Bingham Mine, and it happens to be a Rio Tinto project. It's also unique because last year during a rainstorm, it triggered a landslide inside the mine. That's the first time in history we've ever seen an earthquake set off by human activity. And so those campaigns ads ran, and I think it's wonderful to say that Mitsubishi took one look at the campaign ad and then realized that it was Joel Reynolds and I. And so right after Earth Day, they announced they're pulling out of the consortium. So we immediately followed with this, just talking directly to Rio Tinto and Anglo American, and basically saying, one of your investment partners has left. What part of no don't you understand? Nobody wants you here. You're Canadians. It's an American resource you're trying to destroy, and we're not going to let it happen. And that was very exciting to have that go down. And then it was determined that we were going to run this other ad asking President Obama to do this. And so it was Christmas, and I suggested that just before the ad would hit, I would do one of these little CD sets with an original print in the crystal box and a 100-slide PowerPoint show with my own flippant dialogue typed into it. And we sent that as a Christmas gift to President Obama, both of his daughters, Secretary Jewell, Administrator McCarthy, Barbara Boxer, Pelosi, all of the more environmentally sensitive politicians that I know personally and that my groups knew. And it was sort of a Christmas present. And of course, Obama announced that he was then going to send Jewell and McCarthy up to the Pebble Mine site. Now, that's a token thing. They can't do anything by going there. But it's very clear he wanted to send a message that EPA was considering what was going on at the EPA. And that year for Christmas, as we all know, he announced that they were going to kill all the oil and gas leases that had been allowed in Bristol Bay, and they would at least protect the fishery there, and then redirect at the headwater issue. Joel Reynolds saw the CD, which was pretty in your face. And he said, I want you to do me a favor. He said, I want you to send it to the 3 top executives at Rio Tinto, and I want you to list all the principal American politicians that you've already sent it to. 4.5 months later, Rio Tinto pulled out. And so immediately, NRDC ran this ad saying, thank you very much. And then it was only another 6 weeks, and Anglo American said, we don't have enough money to do this, and there's too much bad publicity. We're gone also. So the only thing that's left is the Canadian Shell Corporation. And so this is the most recent ad that we've run. And it basically says, why don't you give up and go home and just leave this alone? You don't have any investors. They've all gone away. Why don't you take no for an answer and go find something else to do? And my point being here is all day today, you've been hearing about partnering with scientists. And it's certainly one of the high points of an ILCP relationship that we're not just photographers making beautiful pictures, we're informed photographers making informed pictures that are beautiful. And in this case, all of those people were on board with me. I had bear researchers and wolf pack followers and fisheries guys talking in one ear and out the other for 4 years while I worked on all of this. But this is about another kind of partnership because no one but a group the size of NRDC can run ads. These are incredibly expensive ads. I mean, they're hundreds of thousands of dollars to run one of these pages. And so if you're going to do it, you want to know that it works, and you want to see cause and effect because you got a big membership who's going to say, hey, what are you spending your money on? And so I think it's terrific that we've been able to do this, and we also have morphed it with time because now we're using Publico. And so this is just recent, and it was a one day after the other each day in the most read political online digital press that exists. And so we ran this each and every day. Well, at this point, I'm not much of a photography contributor. These are my trees. But it doesn't matter to me because I'm still included in this amazing campaign. It started off using me in a different way. It's morphed, and importantly so, and I don't have a problem with that. I think that this and this and this and these amazing headwater backcountries and these astounding big lakes and the systems that interconnect them and the habitat that it all supports and all the animals that I don't photograph but my colleagues do that are down here. I don't think that this is the site of the largest open pit mine in the world, and I don't think that's even vaguely appropriate. And since this is the last clean American fishery, I mean, we've pretty much torched the rest of them in one way or another, I hope you will all join with me and ILCP and many, many groups. I think there's something like 3,000 of us now in the coalition, and it includes Patagonia and Orvis and Trout Unlimited and just vast hunting groups and all the native villages and all of the people that fish the bay. And say no to the Pebble Mine, please. Thank you very much.